You're muted.
Hanging in there. How are you guys doing?
Good, good.
Hey, Santa Claus.
You're muted. I have my red on.
Oh, exactly. I didn't realize that. You are over there looking like Santa.
Oh, ho, ho. Merry Christmas.
We are live streaming now.
No, I intentionally wore my red sweater today so that I could portray Santa.
Oh gosh.
I went to the cleaners earlier to pick up some things, and that's the first thing the lady said. She said, she knows my name, and so she, most times she remembers me, but today she called me Santa.
Yeah, there's Dr. Martin. We are live streaming, just so you're aware.
And Dr. Martin.
Hey, Kevin.
Hey, Kevin.
Yes, Dr. Thurman, we are live streaming. How can I be of assistance to you today on this bright, sunny day?
Oh, Lord. Hey. Yeah. You need something, mate?
Mr. Board, we are live streaming now, just so you're aware.
Hi, Dr. Boyd. How are you?
Well, how are you doing?
I'm good. Good.
I may not stay on camera the whole time. I just had physical therapy, so I'm kind of laying down. So I'll come on when we need to vote.
Sounds good.
All right.
Hey, Ms. Hogshead, we are live streaming, just so you're aware.
Hi, Leslie. You're muted, but I could make out what you said.
Hey, Leslie.
Still can't hear you.
Still muted. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
said, knowing my big mouth, you could probably hear me all the way. Didn't need that.
All right. Do we want to go ahead and get started now that we have a quorum?
I have to say something first. We welcomed Gertrude Hope to our family on Friday.
Oh,
Congratulations.
Thank
so
you.
this is a granddaughter.
First grandchild, only grand.
Oh, wow. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
So
Grandma.
if we see you over there looking all dreamy eyed, we'll know what that's about.
Right.
We
She's
need-
named after Ken's mother. She was Gertrude.
Oh, that's awesome. Picture soon, please.
Okay.
All right, we'll go ahead and call our meeting to order. Just a reminder of the meeting norms that we've previously agreed to. Under provisions of the Public Meetings Law of the State of Missouri, the board must adopt by roll call vote an agenda that includes the time, date, place, and tentative agenda for the meeting. A copy of the notice and agenda for this meeting was posted on Friday, December 17th, 2021 at the Administration Center, 8855 Dunn Road, Hazelwood, Missouri, and on the district website. May I have a recommendation to adopt the agenda as posted?
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Janice, would you please call for the vote?
Mrs. Hogshead,
Aye.
Dr. Martin,
Aye.
Dr. Paula Thurman,
Aye.
and Dr. Paul Walker.
Aye. Our only agenda item today is the safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan for the 2021-2022 school year. We will now have Kevin Hampton, our chief of staff, to speak with us about this, and this is for board action.
So good afternoon, board. I'm going to share my screen with you. Can you all see that screen there that has 3 different windows open on it? The Safe Return to In-Person Instruction and Continuity of Services Plan, or SRCSP, because we love acronyms, is required by ESSER 3 and must be reviewed with stakeholder feedback, updated if necessary every 6 months, with the next deadline on December 23rd, 2021. Administration has revised the plan based on feedback and the current COVID data for our community. And so with this update that we're sharing with you today, there are really 3 big changes. One is we've gone through and updated any dated language. So if something said that something was going to happen this fall, we've changed the verb tenses on that so that the dates are accurate. Second big change is that any mention of the CDC has been removed from that, from this plan. And then the third big item is that any place where we previously used the language quarantine, that's been changed to exclusion or exclusion from school. And that's to align with Missouri State Statute 167.191, which gives school districts the authority to exclude students from school for any communicable disease. And so those are the big items. The other 2 things that are new to this is that you'll see some clarification around that testing for vaccinated staff members to modify that, and then also test to stay for students. You received a list of updates. Some of those updates, just if someone's looking at this or viewing this meeting, some of those updates show up in the plan that is currently published on the website. However, some of those updates that are in there were made since the board last approved the whole plan back in August. These pieces might have been items that you addressed and met on and approved throughout the course of the fall. So what I'd like to do is just kind of go through fairly quickly and hit on those updates, and then I or Dr. Davis or Dr. Boyd will be glad to try to address any questions. If you want to ask them as we go along, that's fine. Or if you'd rather wait till the end, we'll do whatever is your pleasure. Does that sound good, Madam President? Okay. And others?
Yes.
Okay. So if you look, you'll see the first page here is the same as it was. Page 2, as I mentioned, dated language was updated. There was previously, there was a whole section on CDC guidance, and any mentions there have been removed, as well as changes where quarantine was mentioned throughout the document. Moving on to page 3, you'll see that additional information was included regarding exceptions to the masking requirement. And again, those are updates that show up in the previous version, but were not in the version that you approved back in August. The other change here, you'll see there are fewer items, and that's because we compiled all of the information around athletics and activities in one location on page 13 And we'll see that when we get to that page. Page 4 is a graphic on how to wear and take off your mask. And so that did not change. So page 5, 6, and 7, there are the order of some of these items was shifted. And so that's the main piece here that you'll see. There's a shift in the order for this. The additional item was the switching of the order to hand washing and respiratory etiquette was shifted to respiratory etiquette and hand washing to align to what the DESI language uses and the ESSER 3 language uses. And then also an additional item around instructed how to properly cough and sneeze into students' elbows, and switched the language from social distancing to physical distancing to be consistent with the term used by DESI. And that's something that, that evolved over the course of the pandemic. And initially, everyone used the term social distancing, but I think that added to some of the angst around it. And we saw over time a shift to using that language of physical distancing because that's what's really happening there. And so this makes this consistent with that as well. On page 6, you'll see that there are these pieces around contact tracing, isolation, and exclusion. If you look at this center one, this is our current one here. And we added to the update that was implemented in the fall regarding notifying staff if there's a positive case. The big difference here on page 6 is this second item that's listed in the updates, and it's also the last bullet point in the middle section here and in the plan. And that says students who are not fully vaccinated and identified as a close contact may test to stay with parental consent. And so that's an update in addition to the plan over what was previously published.
What does that mean, Kevin?
So what that means is, using the guidance that we have around determining a close contact, in general, that's someone who's within 6 feet of someone who has tested positive for more than 15 minutes. That's the basic definition. There are some variations to it. That's what is generally understood to be a close contact. And what this says is, in the past, we have any student who was a close contact then would have been excluded from school for a period of time. What this allows is for a student who is a close contact to a positive individual, they may take a test. It could be something even as quick as a rapid test. And if the test is negative, then they may remain in school. This should allow a lot more students who we have had to exclude without test to stay. That should allow a lot more of those students to be able to stay in school following the results of that test. And so
that has to be with parental consent, is what you're
Right.
saying. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So we need to have consent from parents to be able to do that test. We believe that, in most cases, parents will be appreciative of this addition to the plan because we know it's difficult when parents have to, make adjustments for work or other things in their schedule if they have a child who is going to be excluded from school for a period of time. And this should make the things easier for families while still providing safety for our students and staff.
So just to make sure that parents understand who may be listening, we do the test at school?
Yeah, our
Right.
Yes, our nurse could do that. And so we're working through the logistics of that. Dr. Boyd and I and Dr. Davis were discussing that. And so we believe that we'll have all the pieces in place for that so that by January 18th, the day after the Martin Luther King holiday, that we'll be able to begin test to stay and be able to keep more students in school.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add that until that point, because we've had a large number of students that have been excluded, if you will, up until this point. And so I've met with Dr. Stewart's department, who supervises the nurses. And, we have had students who have been asymptomatic or have no symptoms. And because they've been a close contact, certainly we have these guidelines in place of whether they're wearing masks properly. So we're taking a deep look at students who have been excluded to work to keep students in school as much as possible. And then for those ones who have not been vaccinated, because we know some students are getting vaccinated now and they'll get their second dose and it'll sort of butt up to King Holiday and so forth. But what we do want is for those kiddos who have not been vaccinated by that time, that we'll be able to have the test to stay piece. CDC's actually recommending that in their recent guidelines they sent out this past Friday. And so we will have that operational so that we can keep more, again, just to keep kids in school, especially if they don't have symptoms. And then those ones who could potentially be asymptomatic will be able to get some data that'll help, keep everybody safe.
Okay, I have one more question here. Kevin, explain to us why CDC, I can understand why quarantine was removed from this document, but why CDC?
So some of that is tied to the communication that came from the Missouri Attorney General, who has stated that different bodies, governmental bodies, do not have the authority to make decisions regarding various aspects of our response to and mitigation steps for COVID and the pandemic. However, you as the elected board of the school district do have the authority to exclude students from school for any communicable disease. And so by removing that CDC language and placing the authority with the board to make those decisions, it eliminates that concern that the Attorney General expressed that that individuals were making decisions regarding health policy. And this way it lies with an elected board and is in line with the Missouri state statute that gives you as board members the authority to make those decisions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course it makes sense. I just want to make sure that those parents who are listening will understand why we are taking the CDC's recommendations off or removing that from our document.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Kevin, I had a question.
Sure.
To go back to the test to stay, I know that I got like an email about it, so I know that we probably don't have as much information as we will on it, but I did want to ask about the timing of the testing. Because the way that it was described, it sounds like we know that a child has a risk because they've been in contact with someone who's tested positive. And so we're not testing the child right away, are we? Or is there like a window of time where they're I'm trying to figure out when do they get tested to allow them to stay, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So we're working through the logistics. But go, yeah, Dr. Boyd, did you want to respond to Dr. Powell Walker's question?
Based upon the process for contact tracing, we would try to have that student tested, if we would do test to stay, at least no more than 24 hours after we have completed the contact tracing. Because we wouldn't be able to, like when we get a positive on the day of, more than likely logistically, we won't be able to identify everybody in time to get a testing done on that day. But if we can get them, like, let's say we identify through contact tracing potential close contacts on Monday, we should be able to test on Tuesday.
Okay, and I just asked that because when you said 24 hours after contact tracing is done, so it sounds like the goal is to get all of that done the day that we become aware, with testing to happen no later than the next day.
Right, because we notify with contact tracing, we try to notify people within that day that there has been potential exposure. So we should be able to, the next day, be able to identify students the previous night and then have them tested. And we would also be, at the same time, one of the mitigation factors we'd be using would be, the modified exclusion. So that would be in play as well as we move forward.
Okay, and then I did want to ask a couple of more things, and this, it's okay if we're still working through the logistics, obviously, but is there a way that we would be able to expedite parental consent for the testing? Because I could envision a scenario where the form goes home and, maybe the parent isn't aware or something happens and the form doesn't make its way back in a timely manner and the child is coming back to school each day. I'm wondering about that. And then the other thing is, if we have parents who become informed that due to contact tracing, their child has potentially been exposed and that parent opts to keep their child home, how do we handle that in terms of attendance? So those are just a couple of things that came to mind.
Yeah, so the first part, I would quickly say that the parent portal, so we would, in our conversations, we will put communication out to parents. We'll use the portal to give parents the opportunity to be able to go ahead and give us the permission to do that if their child actually comes up. So that way there's not a lag. When there's times that we know a child has been a close contact, the sooner we know, the sooner we can act. But the portal will do that. And then with the second question you raised about students who parents opt to keep them at home. And so we still try, through our AMI to try to keep students engaged academically in and learning. And what I can tell you is that doesn't always work out the way I would like for it to. But students do have access. Sometimes they can access it if the teacher has been okay with it through Zoom. Other times they're making it work. And so it varies depending on the attendance and how that's coded based on how the student shows up. And that has been a huge impact on learning for me, the academic part of it. That's why the exclusion piece has been such a concern. And I brought it up in cabinet last week when we met, is because we have students who may have been a close contact, have no symptoms, and there's an opportunity for us to keep them in school because it does impact attendance and it does impact learning overall.
So, Dr. Davis, it sounds like that's an issue that'll probably need to be resolved. Mm-hmm. And so I guess I just wanted to just mention that it sounds like that's one of the potential things that could happen a lot, possibly. So I just kind of want to put out there how important it is to have something in place for, for those kids whose parents may say, I'm keeping my child home. I'm concerned. I don't want to have them tested. I'm just going to keep them home for a few days. So.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I did have some questions if you're done, Sheila.
Yeah, I am, Dr. Martin.
Got it. So for the tested states, my understanding, they would have to be tested daily. Is that correct? For how many days straight? Is it 10 days straight? It's not just one time tested. It's daily, if I'm not mistaken.
We'd still need to work out some logistics of that, but it would be multiple testing, would not just be one time. Part of it would be monitoring symptoms as well.
Yeah. So when we say work out some things, I know we're not there fully yet, but it's hard to vote on something without having some big impacting factors, because we'll hear from community members pretty quickly if they hear one thing and then something else is being implemented. So for example, if we say, oh, we're going to offer modified quarantine or exclusion and you can test at our school, but then it's not set up, and then how frequently is the test? Not having that information is difficult because I've not found any other, and there could be, but none other in St. Louis County that are actually doing modified quarantine that I know of as of right now. Most have eliminated modified quarantine based on court rulings and CDC guidance right now. So I'm just curious, when would we have that in order to make an accurate decision to communicate to the community, because I can tell you the number of people impacted just by how many are on the dashboard now is going to be more than a handful of kids we're talking about who are going to be impacted by having to be potentially modified quarantine. And so just curious, what is the guidelines? Is it not every day? Is there leeway in the guidelines? What is our protocol? How quickly do results get? Does it have to be a rapid test? Is it just a test daily and we can wait 3 days later for results? What is the kind of guidelines on that?
Yeah, so CDC actually offers some recommendations there. What they say is twice in a 7-day period. It depends on cases and symptoms, right? So if a student is having some symptoms and they get we get a test back and that test is negative and they still have some symptoms. So it varies from student to student, but their guidelines specifically talks about at least twice in a 7-day period of time. It could be up to daily, depending on the child itself. So that would, we'd follow that guidance that they've given, but I think it would be a lot of it around cases.
So who would be looking at the student to modify their or to monitor their symptoms?
Our nurses.
Okay.
So I guess my question is still, what is the protocol going to be? Because I think it's important for us to know what that is if we're voting on something to include modified quarantine, to say you're going to at least be tested with this much time at our school or other options. And then if you decide not to Dr. Paul Walker's point, how many days out is it of school if you decide I'm not going to do either one, I'm not going to test or take my kid to the doctor to get clearance, I'm just going to keep them at home. How many days is that?
Yeah, I don't know if anybody plan has that specificity, Dr. Martin. What I can tell you is that I think the guidance that CDC has given us is testing twice in a 7-day window is good recommendations they give. It could be that we do testing daily. And so I don't know if I can tell you or the board specifically that we will test X numbers of times, but we will use the 2 to 7 as a guidance that CDC has given. It could be that we do test daily. The goal is to keep kids in school and not exclude them from school. We want to keep them there, but I think it depends on each case.
And this is only for students without face covering and not vaccinated, if I'm reading this correctly.
Yes.
But we require face coverings currently, correct?
Correct.
So if Heike and I are sitting next to each other and neither one of us are vaccinated, just for clarity's sake, for people who might be watching, and we both have a mask on, we would not have to quarantine or be excluded at all.
If you're properly masked, and that is exactly what's in the guidance on page 6 and 7. If you look at that particular chart, it says those not fully vaccinated and properly wearing a face covering and diagnosed, then those who are considered a close contact, would not be excluded. And then it also says, if you look on page 6, not fully vaccinated, not properly wearing a mask. So if you're sitting beside each other and you're properly wearing a mask and you're not fully vaccinated, then you should be fine.
So when does it qualify for modified or the stated test option, which is it's only not fully vaccinated and not wearing a face covering? That's the only time that we're talking about.
Not fully vaccinated, that you could properly wear a mask on page 6, not fully vaccinated, properly wearing a face covering and not be excluded.
So if we're not vaccinated, and sorry for clarity, if we're not vaccinated and we are wearing a mask, we won't have to do any stated test or any modified or anything. We're good to go.
If you're not vaccinated, and say that last part again.
And wearing a face mask, based on what Kevin's circling right now, we would not have to test or anything. We'd be good to go, no matter how close of a contact we are.
Yeah. So yes, if you're wearing a mask properly, but you're not vaccinated, then you should be fine. If you are not wearing a mask properly and you're not vaccinated, and you've been a close contact, then we would do test to stay.
Got it. Okay. And obviously, we're recommending masks still to be worn at the time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, Dr. Martin, that we have to clarify that we are still wearing masks.
Is there a certain number or percentage based on the community that you're thinking you would like to see to be able to go to more of a mask optional, as we've heard from community members about wanting to have it a choice? Is there something the administration is looking at to say, hey, when we reach this number, we'll present to the board some other options? Or
Yeah, and also my question is, what about parents who say that they are not going to allow their students to wear masks if they decide to protest or just not want their child to wear a mask?
Yeah, I mean, the policy is that they wear masks. So if you don't wear the mask, you're, not following policy, and we'll take action accordingly. So it's not a choice. The board approves and says we're going to wear masks, then we're going to hold them accountable to that. And then, what was your question again, Dr. Martin? I was writing.
You're asking about the kind of thresholds.
Oh yeah, the threshold. Thank you. So we actually looked specifically at that. I've looked at other districts around. Kevin pulled some data for me, and Dr. Jadali. Some folks have 1%, 4%. I think Rockwood has a 4% threshold, the highest of the most area school districts. And we don't necessarily have good solid data around students because that's not that's not been reported to us. So we can look at cases as they come up and who's positive. So we don't have, nor do any other North County districts have a threshold that we put out there in our plan to determine whether or not we will be mask optional, largely because of our data. I mean, if you look at our zip code data right now, it says that our 7-day rate is, 30s plus, and that's still high. So, at this point, especially with the Omicron variant, just sort of the advent of that and what we've heard from, Dr. Fauci and others, that we need to brace ourselves. I don't think we're at a place where we're prepared to have that conversation in our district in particular based on our numbers.
And I appreciate that. I certainly am glad to hear that we'd be looking at the community numbers too, not just our school numbers, because I think it is a, North County, particularly vaccine rates, one of the lowest in the county, and then particularly it also has the highest transmission rates currently in the number of cases going on right now. Okay. So nothing would change until January 18th. Otherwise, everything stays as is currently.
Yeah, basically, especially when it comes to staffing and we hope a lot of students are getting vaccinated. We know we've had some students come to our clinic, and hopefully kiddos are getting vaccinated, and they'll get that second one in by King holiday. That's sort of a marker in terms of when it was approved by the FDA. What we will be doing on January 3rd is specifically looking at students who may, as we do contact tracing, looking at who's being excluded and who can stay, because we want to make sure we're being really specific about keeping kids in school as much as possible.
Dr. Martin, were you finished with your questions? All right, Mr. Hampton, I think you can proceed.
Thank you. So our next place where there was a change is, on page 9. And if you look, you'll see that the published version of the plan and the proposed version of the plan is the same. This language was changed this fall as the vaccination status of students and of our staff and ongoing clinics that we had, and those things occurred. And those were all items that you had approved as we moved along. They just weren't an approved part of the complete plan. And so that's why you see that change. Jumping on down, page 10 remains the same. Going to page 11, you can see there's updates here on staff COVID testing. And so this is the piece where we're talking about information around weekly testing for unvaccinated staff. That's been a part of the plan for quite some time. As you know, the board approved testing for all staff, but the modification has been made to try to be sensitive to the comments that have been received from staff members. And so what would change with this would be weekly random testing for staff members with advance notice. So go ahead.
Maybe you're going to explain it. I'm jumping ahead, I guess. How are you going to choose when you say random testing for all staff?
So looking here on the updates, you'll see this second bullet point here for weekly testing for staff. Ferguson Florissant School District has retained Concentric through a partnership with DESE and the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services to offer weekly testing for staff. As recommended by public health guidelines, a minimum of 10% of staff will be randomly selected at each district building for weekly COVID screening, and staff members would receive advance notice prior to their testing date. So that nobody shows up that morning and feels like they've had it sprung on them that, you know, they weren't prepared. But this will ease some of that concern about the inconvenience of vaccinated staff members having to be tested frequently. But this threshold of at least 10% also it meets the guidance to provide a greater level of protection for staff and students than not testing staff members at all, not testing vaccinated staff members at all.
And
Do we
just
have a way?
sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hampton, I was going to ask, do we have a way to ensure that it's random? In other words, in a school building, I may be working there and I get selected the first week and then again the third week and then again the seventh week. So is there something that will ensure that it truly is random? And I know that we are having a conversation right now of kind of like how it's all going to roll out. And I think what the hope is for what it's going to look like. But I am concerned about the actual impact on teachers, because I know we talk about what it's supposed to look like, but then we will hear concerns from teachers that they're having to use their playing time, or they're having to use some part of their day that should be for them, or somehow it's some way that it's inconveniencing them. So I'm interested to hear how that part of things, you know, is going to be addressed too.
Yeah,
Dr. Powell Walker, that's kind of, I'm sorry, that's kind of what I was asking about. How is that randomness? I mean, how do we make sure that it doesn't impact some of the staff, maybe more than other staff members?
Yeah, so that's, you know, so technology is easy to be able to, we could do it through Excel, RStudio, quickly. You know, if we use our language, we could literally put in, say, McClure High School. I just use that because it's the first one comes up. Put every staff person in that data, in that specific population, and then do a random sample of 15 or 10%. So 10% is the recommendation. So if you got 100 folks there, then that'll be 10 people that will be randomly pooled, and we can keep that documented in an Excel sheet. So technology-wise, that would be, you know, fairly easy to do. So some of the concerns that have come from staff members through emails that have come to you all and or me has been with, you know, when the testing is being done and how it impacts their planning time and so forth. So to address one piece is, when it's random, I can't tell you that, you know, if Donna Thurman's a counselor at McClure High School and she gets pulled today, that she won't get pulled again next week, because it's randomly done. Your name will still be in there. So every time a random sample is pulled, you could potentially be it. So there's no guarantees there at all. It could be that you never get pulled at all. But I think saying that up front is really important. I think the other piece is that, and Philip and I had this conversation last week, that the testing has to be done in the morning. So that's why that window is from 8 to 11. And so some folks have raised concerns about having to test during the time that they're teaching. One, and Philip can speak to some of this, the testing doesn't take long at all. It's fairly quick and simple, but we have to get the samples from the employees in the morning so we can get those to the lab and get the results in a timely fashion and be able to move forward in a safe way. So there are particulars that we sort of tool through. The random piece, though, has come from our employees saying basically, why did I get vaccinated if I got to get tested all the time? It's inconveniencing. And then with Omicron and all these other things happening, we're trying to keep folks safe. So we want to do as much as we can, also recognizing that it does put an undue pressure on teachers. So we figure random is a win-win because it still gives us some data to help keep folks safe, but at the same time, doesn't necessarily tax everybody all the time. The board, listen, we're going to do what you tell us to do. But you're just trying to find ways to keep folks safe as possible, even in the, with the fact that folks have been vaccinated. We have 91.7% of our employees or teachers who've been vaccinated, by 84.5% employees altogether. And so, we'll do what you tell us to. We're just, trying to keep people as safe as possible. Random is a good compromise, we think.
That 10% would result in, on average, 2 tests over the course of the semester. Mm-hmm. So it's
per staff member.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's random and average, but yeah.
And just for clarification, when staff members are notified that they have been randomly selected, they physically have to leave the building to go, or is it happening on site?
It's in their building. It's in their building.
On the site.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And advance notice, that came up too earlier when Kevin was talking. And so I'll just say that, what makes sense is we don't want to bombard a teacher first thing in the morning. So we let them know the day before. Now we thought about, well, would that impact attendance? It could. So I just want to acknowledge that now, but we also we think giving, them as much fair notice as possible is also important.
Okay, so if they decide not to come to work that day, what happens? Do we select another person?
Yeah, I mean, we would pull the random. So let's just say we let Donna Thurman know today that you've been randomly selected tomorrow, and just say you can't come to work tomorrow. We still go with the 10 we've selected, and then minus the person who, Donna Thurman, who didn't show up, and then we do the next sample. We would still go with the folks that are there. We wouldn't go in and try to pull somebody that morning of and do another different sample, because that would put us back at square one.
You mentioned that the test will be taken and sent to the lab. Is there any reason why we can't use the rapid testing? Or I'm just curious. The one that within an hour or so, if it's done, like Walgreens done.
Philip.
We use the PCR test because it has been more accurate, and we end up using rapid tests if we have to do follow-ups the next day. When we have a batch testing, if a particular batch ends up positive, those persons then test the next day, and we use a rapid test at that point to identify the person that is the positive.
I just had a quick question about, it came up, someone asked me in the community about vaccine requirements for, technically there are employees, but someone who might not be looked at, a coach, for example, who's technically an employee, but isn't a full-time employee. Like, are we following up to make sure they're vaccinated or getting tested weekly as well? Is it all year, or is it only during their season, et cetera, et cetera?
For personnel such as coaches, we actually work with the athletic directors who collect information on a weekly basis regarding the status of coaches, whether they're vaccinated or whether they're testing.
Dr. Martin, did you have anything else?
Would you like me to go on, or
Yes, please.
Okay. So we've talked through this piece here on page 11. Page 13, page 12 is just another infographic. Page 13 it talks about visitors and spectators. Again, this is content that you approved over the course of the fall. It just was not a part of the complete plan that you approved back in August. And so we included this in the updates, but you have approved this previously. Just also to make note here on, and it's not listed in the updates right here, but on the acknowledgements, we want to also make sure that we acknowledge here, and we have in the updated plan. Throughout our planning, we received over 1,500 responses from parents, staff, and students from our community through ESSER and Thought Exchange surveys. Stakeholder feedback helped us prepare the guidelines for a safe return to our schools and learning. And that is a part of the requirements that we have regarding the ESSER funding, is that we include feedback from stakeholders. The other part of this is that we're required to review and revise this document no less than every 6 months with input and consultation from stakeholders. And as I mentioned all the way through this, there are pieces that, as it has arisen over the last several months, you've approved changes to certain aspects of the plan. Those are all included in this. Again, today, this is an opportunity for you to meet the requirement that the updated plan be submitted by December 23rd. And this plan that we're presenting to you today includes all of those updates that have been made over time. The recommendation is that administration recommends the board approve the safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan as is shared with you.
Okay, may I have a motion to approve the safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion?
I do think that we make sure that we tie up some of those loose ends that we talked about. And then let us know as soon as possible when those items have been determined to, when you make decisions about how those things are going to be done.
Dr. Thurman?
Yes.
I think that's a great point, and I think it might be worth it to stop here for just a couple of minutes to kind of call out what those 3 or 4 items are, so that the board knows specifically, what to expect updates on. You want to note, I know you and Dr. Martin both raised some issues that I think people were going to get back to, or Dr. Boyd, you or Dr. Davis, you may have noted those as well.
Mm-hmm. So the one thing that I do have up here is the testing frequency, just to clarify what that frequency looks like. Again, CDC's guidance is around 2, twice in a 7-day period. It could be daily. So just getting some clarity around the testing frequency for those kiddos who are going to be tested to stay.
And I would probably add to that, Dr. Davis, to be able to speak to some of the potential scenarios that could come out of that. Sure. Things like if parents decide that they want to keep their kids home and for how many days and that sort of thing. So to maybe think through some of the potential scenarios and be able to share with the board, how you propose people would move forward, in that instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm writing attendance here, and just how do we address when parents opt out?
Is there anything else the board can think of?
Sorry, I got technical issues. Did we talk about just the update of when we figure out the test to stay details is to be shared with community?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. We did testing to stay and how frequent it will be, as well as giving some scenarios of what that could look like. as well as for parents who may opt out, and what that kind of would look like as well.
But
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify with Dr. Martin, but are you asking about when that's going to be shared with the community so people know what to expect?
Just in general, just making sure it's shared with community, yes. And
Okay,
Sorry, cut on my computer, now I went on my phone, then I cut my phone because I was echoing. So yes, just make sure that we're sharing it out before the first day that we actually do.
I know Ms. Holloman has been working to prepare for communication, but also wanted to base it on any feedback that she receives from the board today. So I think she's working to have that ready to go even before we return to school on January 3rd. So.
Can we just make sure in that communication that we put very clearly that masks are still required at this time? So it's not,
Good
we're
thought.
sticking to the current plans, but very clear that at this time, the Board of Education has voted to continue wearing a mask in all schools and events. Just, I think last time it wasn't very clear. It was just like, we're sticking with the current plan, to spell it out. That way there's no discrepancy about like, there's currently masks going out.
Yeah, and is there also a way that we can share with our community that we got feedback and the number of people that we received feedback from? Because I think it's really important that they know that we did ask for their feedback, and some of these changes are based on some of the information that we received from them, from our community.
Yes, we can do that.
I think
And I
that's,
think they need, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead, Mrs. Hogshead.
I think they need to know the rates also, that our rates are so much higher than other places in the county, and that's the reason we're doing it.
Mhm. Mrs. Hogshead, that's what I was gonna say. So I'm glad you said it first, to kind of provide the rationale for why these things are still in place and to help people make the connection that
Right.
you may see other things happening in other communities, but we have to make the decisions that are best for us based on the data that we have.
Mhm. I think the other piece that came up, I think Dr. Thurman had raised it, was some just clarity around the random sampling piece. And a lot of that has come because of the feedback we've gotten from employees about the testing component of it. So the random sampling is hopefully will reduce the stress that it has on teachers, but we'll be really clear in our communications plan about what that process looks like.
What it looks, thank you.
Are there any other comments, questions from the board? Mrs. Janice, will you please call for the vote?
Dr. Thurman,
Yes.
Dr. Martin,
Yes.
Mrs. Hogshead,
Yes.
Mr. Tyson,
Yes.
Dr. Paul Walker,
Yes. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Janice, will you please call for the vote?
Mr. Tyson,
Aye.
Mrs. Hogshead,
Yes.
Dr. Thurman,
Yes.
Dr. Martin,
Yes.
Dr. Paul Walker.
Yes. Thank you for being here, board, and Dr. Davis and your team, and for those who tuned in this evening. Have a wonderful holiday season and be safe and stay warm.
Yeah, I wore my
Yes.
red so I can say ho, ho, ho. Merry
Oh, that's right.